Current slide. All right. So Chris Brown, I've been with HDR for 11 years now, and my background is actually power. I'm an electrical engineer by education, been in the utility industry for, oh gosh, quite a long time, and been in the data center space very specifically for the last 8 years, totaling, 27 plus years of utility and data center industry experience. And I'm here to just run through the basics at a high level, some of the content that we are experiencing these days in the data center space with some specifics around um, what a data center is, what the different topologies and market sectors are, some of the components and the actual data center facility, and some of the processes and things we think about when we're trying to site, do the due diligence and some of the campus planning. I didn't dive too deep into that because we're staying at a high level, and we could talk about due diligence and campus planning all by itself for a whole section if we wanted to. But then, of course, the power and the water sections, and then just to talk a little bit about topology of the data centers. And I'll try to reserve, 20 to 15 to 20 minutes worth of Q&A at the end of the session as well. So feel free to hold your questions. You can send chats um, to compile the questions, and we'll do our best to run through those towards the end of the session. Or you can just raise your hand when we get there, and we can just hit whatever questions we got. All right, so primarily this is kind of funny, but trying to be comical in the engineering and architectural world, but mission critical is an important word that describes the data centers. And what are data centers? Data centers are basically where the large groups of networked computer servers are housed that are typically used by organizations for the remote storage, processing, or distribution of large amounts of data. Now that's a definition right out of the books on what a data center is. So really the interesting thing is why do we need data centers, and why are they basically going crazy in our world? So technology is the basic. So when it comes down to data centers, the technology that we use in our daily lives and our business practices really drives the need for data centers, whether that's you're in the banking industry or the telecom industry, or you just have a smartphone and you're on your phone all the time and you want instant access to anything from your photo storages to Chat GPT, or Google's Gemini, or all of the new AI tools that are out there for us to use. Those are all housed in data centers somewhere. But also we have new things like, well, not new things, but we have the Internet of Things, which has been trying to really grab a hold of the world for the last several years. But now that we're really focusing on getting some of the data center infrastructure out there in place, the IoT will start to become a bigger daily activity that we have, and it's going to drive more data centers. And then, of course, everybody's seeing a self-driving vehicle out there. I don't know. I was just in Phoenix yesterday, and there were Waymo cars driving all over the place. So I'm sure you all have seen that. Everything requires some sort of data center to help store, maintain, and process that data. That's what's really, really happening in there. So interesting factoids about data centers. Right now in the world, you can see this little pie chart here shows, you've got APAC, EMEA, the US, and the rest of the world. And the US is by far the largest slice of that data center pie. With right now the numbers as is represented here, 2024 global data center breakdown by country, 5,381 data centers. That's a lot, considering that the next nearest country, I mean, isn't even on the radar for where all these data centers are housed. It's really, really interesting, but I like to think that the reason for that is because US is an economic driver, of course, to world economies, but also because a lot of those tech companies that are building these data centers and holding these data centers in and around, they're headquartered here in the US. So that gives us a nice advantage for being the technological repository for data centers. Also, incidentally, because we're talking about ACEC Wisconsin, I did look up how many data centers are in Wisconsin, which it's a little bit of an unknown. It's a mystery. Sometimes it really depends on how the data centers register, but there's anywhere between 17 and 43 data centers in Wisconsin. That was an interesting one for me because I think that, when you look up the data, some of the clients that are out there, they want to be completely anonymous. They don't even want you to know that that's a data center that's parked right next to your community, which is great because we want data security, and we want to keep all that stuff nice and safe and secure. So I appreciate the secrecy behind it, but it does create some issues with real numbers and tracking the data. So on that note, there are several companies out there that track industry trends and what have you, and I'm going to run through a couple of their slides because they do a really great job of capturing information about what our industry is doing. So Cushman Wakefield, and also incidentally, the next couple of slides that I'm going to show are all based on 2024 actual data, and then we'll add some predictive measures in there as well. But currently, as I said, the U.S. is significantly larger data center. We have significantly more data centers. Not only that, but we have significantly more data centers in the pipeline. Now, if you look closely at this slide, the bubble size is obviously with the future increase in capacity. But down here we have operational numbers. The current capacity in the U.S. in megawatts is roughly 16,820 megawatts of in operation data centers. And this is looking at, colo, cloud, and other. And again, this is based on 2024 numbers. But the real interesting thing is that the pipeline that's there is going to grow another 2.5 times over the next, handful of years. They're saying by 2028, 2.5 times. So we're going to add another roughly 25,000 megawatts of data center in the United States. And the next closest is APAC, where they're roughly in operation currently. They're about 10,000, roughly 600 megawatts in operation, and the pipeline's about 13,300. So one of the things that really, in my mind, we're going to see this on one of the later slides, but a lot of what drives the big, there's a vacancy number out there, and I think it's more of a commercial real estate jargon, but the vacancy inside of the data centers is very low in the US. It's roughly, looking at the 2024 numbers, we were roughly at about 5% vacancy. That number is way down right now. And depending on which market sector you're looking at, colos in the US right now are like 2.6% vacancy numbers, which means that the data center is fully rented out, when they're in operation, which is a very big revenue generator for many companies. So those are the things that are interesting to see. Also, down here in this section of the slide, you'll see established markets. Now, Virginia is a giant market sector for data centers. Northern Virginia is the largest data center market out there. But, established markets like Virginia, Atlanta, Dallas, Phoenix, Oregon, and then so on and so forth. Those markets still continue to grow, but they might be topping out a little bit in some of those areas. Whereas new emerging markets, around here, you got Kansas City, Nashville, Iowa, Minneapolis. So you got some local presence, Austin, and then so on and so forth. But the beautiful thing here is that the AI and cloud services is really helping us to continue to grow. And some of the utility spaces here, looking at this graph here, you've got megawatts capacity growth, and you've got the percent growth. So some of these market sectors that look like they're fairly small in megawatt size, the growth in their area is substantial. You get up to 9% growth in Salt Lake. I mean, we know that there's data centers coming into Salt Lake, But comparatively speaking, you look at like a Texas market where you have an astronomical amount of megawatt growth in that area, but it's by comparison to a Salt Lake, the growth is only roughly around 7%. So some regions already have a pile of megawatts going into their data center and planned into their data centers. But as far as their total megawatts by state, it's not a huge impact to them. And in other states, it's significantly more. So that's interesting. Um, Jumping up here to our AI cloud and AI revenue services, they're thinking it's going to top 100 billion in revenues in 2025, and then forecasted to 2x that by 2028. So if that tells you anything, it just means that our market sector currently, driven by a lot of our market sector growth is driven by AI, but we still have cloud and enterprise in the background that are still being serviced and still growing and still occupying space. So, but anyway, AI is really, really booming. Some of the other things that are happening out there in this space that's real interesting is the rack densities. So we'll get into a little bit more about the components as we run through the slide deck. But the rack densities are how we gauge, basically build out the IT, critical IT megawatts for a data center, or even kilowatts of the data center. But the individual racks, that's where the servers are at, and that's where the GPUs and CPUs are all housed that do all the data processing. Once upon a time, not terribly far long ago, like in 2024, we were still in the single digits per rack for kilowatts. I think I don't remember the actual number, but 2014 was like 5 kilowatts per rack. Then we started to pick up some pace. NVIDIA and everybody else started building these GPUs and what have you that require more power, and we've got more sophistication and more chip development. We got ourselves up into that 17 kilowatt range per rack. And now, in today's times, 2024, rounding out to now 2025, we're seeing, across the colocation and hyperscale world, you're seeing anywhere from 10 to 50 kilowatts is pretty typical for per rack inside of a data center. And then we, as anybody who's paying attention to data centers and power usage with AI out there, we're on track. We're on track to hit 100 to 120 kilowatts per rack by the end of 2025. It's really interesting. There's that drives a lot of things. It drives heat dissipation requirements. It drives just total power usage on the site. It's got us all in the industry thinking about how to manage this power and the heat and all of the other aspects that come along with it. But one of the other interesting facts, that 120 kilowatts per rack. Now, you would think that if you're thinking about just data centers in general, all of the existing data centers out there, most of those existing data centers cannot handle 100 plus kilowatts per rack inside of their current data center construction, as is constructed. So what this means is most of the new data centers will be built to handle that sort of power per kilowatt, power or kilowatt per rack. But the existing data centers out there, they're either going to have to go back and do retrofits. So there could be a whole nother market sector driven around retrofits of data centers, looking at, how do you handle upgrading these things to current times. But anyway, it's a big deal for us. Getting back to the how we choose the areas at which we look to develop. Most of the time, the big drivers are power availability and land availability when the clients are really looking to site these things. Power is always going to be the fastest or the longest to market driver when we're looking at this site developments. Also, there's plenty of other things that go into this. You have to have a friendly jurisdictional, so the development pipeline, is it a long long, thick pipeline in there, and obviously land prices, but also the connectivity. Connectivity is very large, very big for a data center. You can't have a data center that's connected and processing without a fiber connection to the world. Um, and then, boils down to, again, some of the incentives that are driving those sectors. Most of the big data center, your big power users, they really are trying to be renewable and carbon free, net zero by certain timelines. Most of them have target dates that are already out in the public eye, but they're really putting a lot of effort into paying for, developing, participating, encouraging the renewables and carbon-free construction for power supplies. It's not that we don't think about things like environmental risk and taxes and water availability, but they aren't always the most important. Environmental risks, we can handle those things on a site per site basis, and water availability these days, most communities are wanting a little bit more corporate sensitivity to the water usage by these data centers. So there's a lot of data center clients these days that are driving. They'll still use water. It's always a great and least expensive method of cooling these data centers, but they're trying to be conscientious and supportive of the communities and not necessarily just going in and using up all the water. So there's alternative methods like air cooling and closed loop uh, constituent type of cooling systems and stuff that we can go over later. When it So looking at the various reporting outfits out there, JLL always puts out a great data center market update report. Some of the interesting ones, JLL was primarily looking at the co-location market in this case, but artificial intelligence, this is what we're seeing across the industry for the most part. Artificial intelligence is still pushing, the big growth. Roughly 20% of all data center demand is based on the AI growth. And of that, interesting, this is one of those areas where I think that everybody should keep this in mind. While the data center industry, we've seen huge growth, 21% year over year average growth in data center power consumption or power. But really, in the grand scheme, it's roughly 3% of the total US power in 2023 was used by data centers. So while we in the data center industry are using up a bunch of that power, it's still not huge. It is big on the grand scheme, but percentage wise, it's not what you hear in the news all the time that data centers are consuming all the power in the world's grid. Well, we're definitely using up all the available power out there and trying to find areas where the utilities and generators and developers and such are trying to add more power to the grid, but it's not using up every last ounce. However, with that said, our growth rate, it's looking like the numbers are pointing towards roughly a 6% growth by the end of 2025 so instead of we're in that 3% range, I think the forecasts from 2024 were around 4.5% of the global or the US power usage. It's probably going to end up being closer to 6%. So we're definitely growing and we're absorbing all of the available power out there that we can get our hands on. Another big part of data centers, they're big projects, whether it's a single build or a campus or even regions. Data centers require a lot of skilled labor to build them, and once they're built, also operating them. So labor, when we're looking at locating these things around the world, the labor markets don't always support that. So you got big gaps in available resources out there. So whenever I go to the local colleges and we're talking to young men and women who are graduating high school, even just looking for what's out there in the world, if they're not all looking to be engineers and architects and, technical degreed people, we need loads of electricians and mechanical piping folks and what have you. There's plenty of jobs out there in the world if people just get after some of these, look at some of these technical trades. When we're looking up here in the colo market, this should just be mind-blowing to everybody, but if you know anything about the data center space, and if you don't know anything about the data center space, Northern Virginia is the mecca of data centers. Whether you're hyperscale or colo or enterprise, they have 4,575 data centers that are known to be in the Northern Virginia area. So by comparison, the next the next closest is actually the Pacific Northwest, which includes Oregon and Washington at 987. It's a significant difference. By far and away, Northern Virginia is the largest data center market. But again, the U.S. is where the data center market primarily is just amazing. And I think that the vacancy rates inside of those, talking specifically about colos and the information that's provided, colo facilities, again, I mentioned 2.6% vacancy rate, which means that those data centers are making the owners money hand over fist. But also an interesting little factoid that JLL put out in their report is that of 77% of the space, data center space that's in construction right now, of those projects that are in construction, 77% of the space inside that data center is already leased out before it even goes into operation. So, this is why you're seeing everybody wants to get into the data center business. You got more private equity and more developers moving from commercial real estate or whatever it is that they're in, moving towards the data center space because, everybody wants the space is already leased by the time they actually get it up and operating. So time to money and ROI on your investment is very big. Some interesting information about the CapEx real quick. Hyperscales are looking at, roughly 200 billion in CapEx. And it is amazing to see that much money getting piled into the data center world. And again, a lot of private investment money, private equity, venture capitals, big hyperscale companies like the big five, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, and so on and so forth. All right, CBRE also puts out a nice report that we leverage just to kind of keep tabs on the market. Some of the interesting things, once again, this one is really tracking colos, but power is always it's the number one topic for these things, power and sourcing the land across any region that you're really in. Again, I mentioned the vacancy rates; those are pretty substantial in driving this. This particular this graph shows the inventory by market. So Northern Virginia, again, I mentioned, is the largest data center market in the entire world. This one gives you a little bit more of a global perspective. You got London, Tokyo, Frankfurt, Sydney, Singapore, Hong Kong, Dallas, Chicago, Amsterdam, Paris, Silicon Valley, Sao Paulo, Santiago, Querétaro, Bogota. But one of the interesting things that I thought in this is that you got 4 U.S. Markets that are in the top 10 markets in the world. This graph down here shows the vacancy rate, and that's exactly what I was saying earlier. Is that 2.6% vacancy rate really drives the desire for investors to be building their data centers where they're building, and you can see this chart progresses as the markets get a little further down the road with their megawatts that they actually have in their market to a vacancy. It's really inverse proportional. So more data centers you have, or the lower vacancy rates, drives more data centers into the space. All right, so let's get into some other topologies and market sectors. This is a very busy slide, but I'm going to break it down like this. Hyperscales in this column, co-location facilities in this column, enterprise in this column. And so really, that boils it, that pretty much breaks it down into the different typologies of the traditional data centers. And the hyperscalers are represented by, again, the big five tech companies, and you can see the symbols and what have you, and you know who they are. But these have their own versions of so EMEA and APAC also have their own version of their big five and the hyperscalers, which is probably primarily a mix of what's already on the screen, likely. But hyperscale companies tend to own and operate multiple campuses with several data centers. These things are, it's not just one building, it's usually, or one data center, it's usually multiple data centers on a campus in an arrangement where it's a secure facility that has all of the amenities to operate and take care of the employees that are on that site. And you can see some of the other. You can read all of these things in here. You're looking at co-location facilities. Sometimes these are campuses. It's not unheard of to be campuses, but it could be just a purpose-built facility. Co-location, I like to think of the co-location providers. It's almost the best description I've ever heard at a conference once upon a time was these are like hotels. You have the hotel owner, they build the facility, they build the shell, and they build it in such a manner that they're trying to attract a level of client. So if we have a very reliable co-location facility that is servicing like the tier 3 and above type of data center clients, which means very reliable, 5 nines, 99.999% uptime. The people who are going to be the coming in the hotel space, they're going to be folks looking. They don't want to own a brick and mortar shop. They just want to house their data center and computing power up in the cloud. That's what these co-location facilities are going to be like. Or you can use an apartment building. You've got the apartment owner, and the renters or lessees are going to be the folks that are housing their systems on that particular setup. You also have inside a co-location space, you have a few different type of arrangements. You have the retail space, the wholesale, and the warm shell down here, build to suit. And the important piece of this is co-location facilities. Sometimes they'll work for the hyperscalers. They'll go out and they'll develop the land and they'll build a shell, and then the end user, the owner, will come in and they'll build it to their own criteria. They might even run the facility after that. Enterprise, we get a lot of questions about what is the difference between a hyperscale and an enterprise? Aren't they doing their own thing? Well, enterprise data centers it's your brick and mortar facility. You're using your own IT assets inside of that space, and you're processing your own information inside that space. So banking and IT solutions and some of the other outfits that might be regulatory, it might be directed or demanded by regulatory requirements or legal requirements to handle that, maintain the IT assets. Those are the big differences between enterprise, colo, and hyper scale. So moving on to what are data centers used for? So traditionally, data centers are organizational data processing and storage. That's what has been the data center is traditionally the original use of a data center, and is also the most prevalent still is this, organizing, managing, processing, storing data. You also have the cloud provisioning and services. This is the type of data center has become the largest growth segment in the market. And you've got the big guys, the big fives are all operating in that space. And it's really the cloud, online presence, data processing, storage, all handling through software as a service type of applications. And then, of course, you have AI. AI and machine learning facilities that are the hottest data center uses in the market right now, largely driven by the generational advancements we've had with ChatGPT and Gemini and some of the other AI systems that are out there really driving the market. And currently, you'll hear folks talk about you'll hear folks talk about training AI training facilities or learning models. Well, right now the AI systems are learning and developing and growing and moving the data processing when they're well, essentially I'll put it like this, is largely it's being used to develop bots or agents which collect, analyze, and organize data for both query resolutions with increasing accuracy on the menial tasks. So what really is meant by that is they're learning and the models are all getting more and more accurate. The goal is to when these things get to a certain level of accuracy, you'll hear the notion of inference. And it really means that the accuracy is increased and the bias is reduced. So the machines, when we prompt them, are putting out a very realistic answer. And when that happens, we're going to start to see that AI machine learning environment turn from a training model to a revenue model. So that's really the next evolution of that. Right now, the AI and machine learning and doing all of its processing of data is driving a lot of that power use. So they say when we move from the learning models to the actual revenue models, we'll start to use less energy inside these data centers. I don't know. We'll see about that. All right. So moving on to what these data centers look like. So hyperscalers are usually quite large, and they're going to include a lot of the facilities on the site. They're typically going to be a high secure environment, meaning that they have manned security entrances and monitoring how you get access to these sites. Be self-contained in here. Usually there's data halls. There's the data halls. There's an admin facility in here. You've got all the cooling and all of the water, wastewater facilities are handled within the facility, or they've at least got themselves a jurisdictional utility that handles the stuff. But they still have the cooling and the power gets handled on the site. And then you've got some of the smaller, not necessarily smaller, colo facilities are still fairly substantial buildings, but one of the things that's interesting about colo facilities is a lot of times they're crammed into smaller spaces. And so you'll see a lot of rooftop stuff. You've got rooftop cooling, mechanical cooling systems, you've got rooftop gens, you've got maybe some solar projects, but you got things get kind of stacked up inside of a colo facility, generally speaking, because they're in a smaller footprint. And then, of course, this is looks like a quintessential brick and mortar enterprise data center, building that that they don't want you looking inside, and they don't want you knowing what's inside of it and that sort of thing. They're processing, owning, and managing their own data. So some of the components of the facilities, this is again that one that we had the top-down look, the bird's eye view looking over the top of it. We've got some rooftop mounted generators. Usually when the generators are, well, we'll get into that in a sec, but the gens, when they're outside, they're usually encased in some sort of a cladding and then you've got the mechanical units up here. You've got some stored, maybe makeup water tanks and maybe some chem treatment facilities over here where they're getting the water conditioned to what they're trying to accomplish on the site. What's not shown here is when you have large data centers, typically when they get over a certain megawatt, it really depends on the utility jurisdiction. But when the data centers get over a certain megawatt content, they're going to require you to have an on-site substation, whether they own it and operate it, and you take medium voltage service, but not shown on here as a substation. But generally, there's going to be a substation. This one is a co-location type of facility that is, it's not separated from the entire community with a security fence and all that kind of stuff. So fairly self-contained. Looking at some of the things that I'm mentioning. So you've got these encased generators. These are the backup generators. Almost all mission critical data center facilities are going to have some sort of backup power. And in this case, we're going to talk about the backup power being primarily diesel generators. That's still the trend, even though people are trying to get away from generators. diesel generators are mainly because of the air quality permitting and that sort of thing. They're still the best solution for mission critical facilities to get very high reliable immediate backup generators that can fire up in the time required for the data center to go from utility outage and transfer through its uninterruptible power supply and manage its pickup of that fault zone and get it back into power. Most common backup generators are still low voltage gens, primarily I think because everybody knows them. They're parked. They're in known quantities. They're a known, very well vetted machines, but they can also park them right outside the data halls, and they can be very close to the outage zones that they're trying to service. And usually, we're talking about machines that can start up very rapidly. So the UPSs don't have to be sized substantially to handle, the bridging between utility failure and backup, moving to backup generation. Anyway, this is an example of an enclosed generator package. They don't all have to look terrible. These look kind of cool. But as I said, for the most part, they have enclosures, and inside the enclosure, if they're going to be housed outside, inside the enclosure is the gen itself and then some sort of exhaust port. The ratings and size actually, so this is a different style. The generators are actually inside of the data hall, or inside, not the data hall, but inside the data center. They would have a kind of a cordoned off area where they house the generators when they put them inside the buildings. But that's for fueling and exhausting and stuff like that. And of course, the tie-in to the electric planes within the data center itself, data hall, data center, where they are able to transfer from typical power over to their backup gen power. Some of the things that we always have to deal with when it comes down to generators is noise, especially if you're in an area that's more urban and you're planting these things in the middle of an urban environment. We have to pay particular attention to noise, and there are ways that you can attenuate the noise. And generally, when that happens, it's going to run up the cost of buying that particular unit. So emissions, air quality permitting, there are many. I'm no air quality permitting expert, but I do know that when we go and we're doing diligence and we're siting these data centers, that understanding the local permitting requirements is very important because we might have a giant site and we could put all kinds of data centers on it, but the air permit requirements, you may be saddled with only being able to have a certain number of generators because of the air permitting requirements, and therefore you end up not being able to utilize the entire space available to build data centers. Also, kind of some of the other things that we talk about, folks in the industry, we talk in different languages sometimes. The utilities, we want to talk in reliability. So we park these generators outside the data centers, and we build them out in a way that we're looking at some reliability metrics. A lot of times we're talking in an N+1 condition, which means basically we're going to put, let's say, 4 generators where we might only need 3. We call that 4 to make 3. And that one extra generator, the +1 generator, is there just in case one of the other generators fail. That gives us a nice reliability zone, and we're able to meet the metrics of most of the end users, whether it's a hyperscale or a co-location type of facility. There are plenty of data center clients out there these days that are also looking at medium voltage. I think some of the advantage of the medium voltages is we can maybe get them in larger generator sizes. I would say that most of the generators on the low voltage side that we see are anywhere from 1 megawatt up to 4 megawatts, we'll say 1 to 4 megawatt-ish. And there's versions in there. There's like 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5 megawatt gens and such. But on the medium voltage side, now you're talking about plugging in at a different location. generally you're not going to park them right outside the data halls, because you still need to transform that medium voltage to the low voltage that gets distributed through the data center itself. And so you might end up seeing what we would call a central generator plant, and they might plug it in closer to the load serving substation. Maybe they'll tie it in, have some paralleling gear and some sort of tie breakers that tie back into the substation's switchgear or outdoor medium voltage systems. But those are certainly happening more and more. But generally speaking, I would still say the most common is low voltage gens outside, parked right outside the data halls. Fuel for these things, most of the time that fuel is going to be diesel, but we look at natural gas all the time. If there's nat gas lines in the area, we'll certainly look into nat gas backed up diesel or generators, or even look at dual fuel. And in some cases, some of our clients are actually looking to further reduce and be good environmental corporate citizens, and they're looking at things like hydrogen fuel. All of it's on the table. It's just a matter of money. But the options are there. So when it comes down to what these mechanical systems might look like, now I'm an electrical engineer explaining mechanical cooling, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit. But there's multiple different ways to cool a data center. And some of it depends on the environment that they're in, whether they're in a hot, arid environment or a hot, humid environment or a cold environment. They'll select the cooling that best fits that data center in that region. And some of the examples, you got airside economizers. This is direct cabinet cooling, so big fan walls and CRAC units, which always cracks me up because just because I'm in the data center industry, everybody uses acronyms, and just about every client has their own series of acronyms, so you'll get confused real quick. But CRAC units in the mechanical cooling industry seems to be fairly common. But computer room air conditioner, it always cracked me up to hear it called a CRAC unit. But and then you got some air cooled chillers. Those, you'll see these things outside, and I think that a lot of the air cooled chillers is all about having available square inches, or square feet, who knows, of available space to run your cooling through. And everybody's seen the infamous cooling towers that have little plumes of evaporative materials floating up into the the atmosphere, and then centrifugal chillers. So some of the important things to take out of this is you got fluid-based cooling, such as the chilled water, glycol, direct expansion. These systems can be put into a fluid economizer mode through a heat exchanger with ambient conditions, and it really depends on the climate that you're in. So again, there are several ways to skin this cat, but you got the fluid-based cooling and you got air-based cooling. Air-based cooling, indirect evaporative cooling, direct evaporative cooling, and enthalpy wheel cooling, as well as packaged air handlers and things that go in conjunction with airside economizers. Again, really depends on the environmental conditions you're in, which systems you use. And in several cases, we're looking at combos of those types of cooling mechanisms to handle a data center, and especially on the campuses. The one thing that we're going to look at next is some examples. So the airside cooling. So the objective of these things is to really separate the airstream and the return, the supply airstream and the return airstream, and that helps them design systems that'll maximize the efficiency of the system. So one of the things that we're struggling with, which I mentioned earlier, is this increasing densities. So with the rise of AI and the kilowatts per rack that I discussed earlier, it drives a heat issue. We got to figure out how to dissipate this heat. So when it comes down to it, you got different systems, and as I said, in most data centers, you're going to end up with combinations. But this is an example of where you would the hot aisle or cold aisle, they're looking to enclose it So this method requires the enclosure of one of the equipment aisles, so either the hot aisle or cold aisle. But anyway, it's all to separate that air streams to help them design an efficient system. So you got racks of servers here, and you got this hot aisle system in this instance is showing it getting captured and brought up into the exchangers. So in another system, you got the close coupled cooling. This moves the cooling units closer to the IT systems. So the IT rack, what have you, they normally rely on it when you're not using a closed couple. They're going to have air plumes and ducting and stuff that move the air around. In this case, you're moving the cooling units close to the IT equipment. This is done with in-row or rear door coolers, which place the cooling units in the equipment rows between the IT equipment racks. It's kind of nifty. The liquid cooling is what people are talking about these days. Lots of liquid cooling. Immersion cooling is also coming into the conversation, or has been in the conversation for a while. But the liquid cooling direct to the server chips, so they're doing that through cold plates at the server chip and device equipment for piped connections to the units. These are called cooling distribution units, CDUs. It's a word that you'll hear a lot when you're talking about liquid cooling direct to chip, CDUs. So these things are introduced between the primary cooling plant and the piping distribution to the racks, and I'll show a slide for that here in a sec. This is an example of immersion cooling. There are systems out there that certainly use immersion cooling. I think for your typical hyperscalers and colos, you're not going to see a lot of immersion cooling just yet, but you never know. There's always changes in the market. So as I mentioned earlier, the CDUs, the cooling distribution units, it's a unit that brings in the cooled process water or whatever it happens to be. If it's a closed loop system, it'll be some sort of a liquid that comes into the CDU, and that cooled stuff gets piped, whether it's in floor. We've actually seen some of these that are designed overhead, but I don't know about you all. But I've built a few houses in my day. Anytime you put pipe overhead in a ceiling, you always have to think about leaks. And I don't know about, I mean, yes, I don't want to say it's a bad idea, but putting your cooling systems, liquid cooling systems overhead seems like it might create some leak issues for you, or leak detection. But I don't know. We're designing these systems pretty solidly, and there's lots of vendor partners out there that are making systems fairly bulletproof. So maybe they do work in the ceilings. But right now, this one shows underfloor, and the piping comes in. You get the cooled water comes in, and it runs up to each one of the servers, and it takes that water and runs it through the chip heatsink and brings that hot water back out through the other side. You can call this technical water, or something that they're working through the CDU, through to the direct to the chip to get the cool water to it to help it maintain its temperature ratings, and then push the hot water or hot solution that's inside of the pipes out the other side. Yeah, a couple of also interesting notes. The UPSs. So UPSs, uninterrupted power supplies. For the most part, the UPSs, and I'll go over this a little bit later too. They power the IT racks and some of the cooling systems, like the CDUs. You don't want a utility power outage to stop your servers from serving, and you don't want it to stop your cooling from cooling. And they can correlatively cause some major system failures if you don't move that heat out of the chip spaces before they start to shut down and the utility loss. But anyway, all that to say, they're ran off from UPSs, and that helps with that response time, but it also helps with outage times and being able to move that power, I mean, not power, but the heat out of those systems before we have problems. CFD analysis are becoming more critical in this stage. For those of you who want to know what CFD is, that's computational fluid dynamics. Those tend to be big, expensive software tools that analyze it can analyze heat, and it can really show you where some of your systems might break down. So CFD can be very important for analyzing, cooling systems inside of a data center. It can also help you economize your data centers from a heat movement perspective. All right, so as I said earlier, a lot of the data centers are looking at multiple ways to cool their systems, but we're still roughly 75% liquid and 25% air cooled, and you end up with systems that hopefully are really directed towards the cooling technology that's there and available, and what we're trying to solve for.
Chris, I just wanted to jump in quick. Let you know you've got 5 minutes left.
Holy cow, that went fast.
If you wanted to, if anybody, I haven't seen any questions in the chat yet.
Okay, well, I'll blaze through some of this stuff. This is what an IT a data hall looks like. These are the racks. Usually, you have cableways and busways and stuff that serve these things. The one important nugget to take out of this, besides that's what the servers look like, is that the IT hardware is significantly more expensive than the actual building and the infrastructure to build it is. Roughly 50 to 150 times more expensive than the actual building and infrastructure to get these data centers up and operating. Lots of cabling going into these things. You've also got the electricity. You're going to go all the way from the utilities. They want redundant sources from the utilities at the high voltage level, all the way down through the medium voltage levels, which can be 4160 to 34.5. Redundancy planning is very important for data centers. They're called mission critical facilities because they don't want to they operate them with a reliability and redundancy requirements to meet the end use. As I said earlier, the electric systems are designed to run through dual corded busways out to the racks. So you have an A and a B to create that redundancy to help power those things. Let me see here. More about the different market segments. Yeah, hyperscalers, they're going to be bigger sites. They're going to want them to be very reliable. They're going to be bigger power users. Co-location facilities still want big reliability. The 5 nines are still important. Speed to market is very, very important. But your campuses will be, or your sites will probably be smaller unless they're going to do a full campus site. Now, AI facilities we're going to plug those in everywhere. We're doing lots of big campuses with the hyperscalers for AI, but all the way down to finding adaptive reuse plugged into your local neighborhoods for AI use. Site selection, data centers, they're trying to find places all around the country. Usually power and land are the number one, but also, depending on the what they're trying to use these to serve, they're going to be looking at latency issues if they're looking at cloud services. If it's AI, they can move out into the sticks a little further and not worry too much about that. AI is not generally, because they're in the learning mode still, they're not really operating those things based on latency just yet. When they're buying these sites, usually they're looking at the business factors and the land factors, which we've already kind of discussed, and the supplies of the utility. So they want to be able to go in, get the power, get the land, and they want a friendly environment to do their development. So tax codes, tax incentives, local communities supportive of economic development, all that sort of thing. These are just examples of potential of, when we start doing campus development, we're looking at test fits and we're trying to lay down the data centers, the medium voltage routing, the substation locations, transmission routing, switchyard locations, and all of the various infrastructure that gets put into place to enable a data center campus. You got cooling yards, again, substations, some office buildings. We're really trying to, I always call it playing with a Lego set. We're trying to create an efficient Lego model that utilizes the space as best we can, while keeping all of the components of these data centers nearest to the facility that's using them.
All right.
One of the
Chris, sorry,
things,
I just
yeah.
wanted to jump in with, since we're at their last minute, I just wanted to let everybody know we're gonna, this is recorded. We'll have this up here. And your continuing education credits, I've taken attendance today. I will get those out to folks after this event in a couple days or so. But looks like we're at 1 o'clock already. That was awesome. That was awesome, Chris.
Yeah.
A lot to go through. So sorry for interrupting you there. I just wanted to be respectful of everyone's time. So
No problem.
I'll make sure your information is shared out with folks too, in case they want to follow up with you with any questions, because clearly
Sure.
you've got a lot of knowledge on this.
Mm-hmm.
We need a part 2.
Yeah, maybe we'll bring you back for part 2. We'll get some feedback from the audience. So
We can call it 201.